The winter of 1878 painted Montana Territory's bitter valley white with snow, but the crimson splattered across Jasper Morton's general store door told a different story. 3 riders, their badges gleaming false promises in the morning sun, cornered a trembling shopkeeper behind his own counter. Their leader, a man whose smile carried more venom than a rattler's bite, pressed his revolver against Morton's temple. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, friend, the man drawled, his voice honey-sweet with malice, I'm going to ask you one more time, where's the old man who runs the Circle Cross Ranch? Morton's eyes darted to the door, probably wishing he'd never mentioned the peculiar rancher who'd been buying extra supplies lately. I don't know much about him, Marshal Wade. Just that he keeps to himself, tends his cattle. Nothing special. About him, nothing special. Wade's laugh could have curdled milk. That nothing special rancher somehow managed to track and kill 2 of my best men last week. Didn't even leave tracks. Now what kind of simple cattleman you know can do that? Before Morton could answer, the bell above the store door chime. A figure shuffled in, shoulders hunched against the cold. Thomas Green, the man they'd been discussing. His weathered hands trembled as he gripped his walking stick, rheumy eyes squinting at the scene before him. At 60-something, he looked, every bit the frail rancher they'd described, down to his patched coat and scuffed boots. Wade's men tensed, hands hovering over their guns, but their leader waved them down with a smirk. What threat could this old man pose? The Circle Cross Ranch sat like a peace offering in the valley's palm, nestled between towering pines and the rushing waters of the bitter river. Thomas Green had chosen this spot 5 years ago for its isolation, though he told folks it was for the good grazing land. The main house, built solid from local timber, watched over a collection of well-maintained barns and corrals. Everything about it spoke of careful planning, right down to the clear sight lines in every direction. Inside, Thomas moved with the deliberate slowness of age, setting his morning coffee to boil while his adopted daughter Sarah kneaded bread dough at the kitchen table. At 17, she had her mother's wheat-gold hair and a spirit as wild as the mustangs that sometimes roamed their valley. They'd found each other 3 years ago when Thomas discovered her hiding in his barn, half-starved and running from demons. Neither of them spoke about. You're thinking awful hard for someone just making coffee, Pa, Sarah observed, flour dusting her forearms. Her keen eyes, sharp as any hunter's, missed little about the man who'd given her a home. Thomas allowed himself a small smile, one that barely touched the corners of his mouth. Just wondering if Miller's bull is worth the asking price. Heard. Could use some new blood. He didn't mention his trip to town, or the men he'd spotted watching his property last week. No need to worry her with such things. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, leaving white handprints that matched the ones on her cheeks. Speaking of the herd, Jamie Ross rode by yesterday while you were checking the north pasture. Says his pa's willing to pay top dollar for some of our spring calves. Thomas's hands stilled momentarily on the coffee pot. Jamie Ross, eh? Been seeing a lot of that boy lately. His voice carried a weight Sarah couldn't quite understand. He's nice, Pa. Not like the Shaw boys who keep stirring up trouble. Sarah's defense came quickly, but her eyes dropped to the dough. Besides, he's teaching me to shoot better. The coffee pot clattered against the stove harder than necessary. Shooting? Since when do you need shooting lessons? Since always. You won't teach me proper, just basic safety rules. Jamie says a girl ought to know how to defend herself out here. Sarah's chin lifted in that stubborn way that reminded Thomas so much of another young woman long ago. Thomas felt the familiar ache in his left shoulder, where an old bullet still nestled close to bone. Basic rules keep people alive, Sarah. Anything more than that tends to invite trouble. He'd spent years cultivating this image of a simple rancher, someone whose hands shook too much to shoot straight. The kind of man who'd need help from young Jamie Ross to defend his property. Their morning routine continued, each movement a carefully choreographed dance around the truth. Thomas fed the chickens, his limp more pronounced when Sarah watched from the kitchen window. He checked the fence lines with exaggerated slowness, making sure the hands they'd hired saw nothing but an aging rancher fighting time's cruel march. But in the barn, alone with the horses, Thomas's movements shifted. His hands steady as mountain. Stone cleaned and oiled a hidden Winchester rifle with practiced precision. The weapon's stock bore no initials, but the number of notches along its barrel told stories he'd spent years trying to forget. The ranch hands whispered sometimes about the strange precision of Circle Cross's operations, how the cattle never seemed to get rustled despite the troubles other ranches faced, how predators mysteriously avoided their herds, how their boss, old Thomas Green, seemed to know about trouble coming before it arrived. "Must be luck," Thomas would say, his voice trembling just enough. "The Lord watches over fools and old men." But the Lord had nothing to do with the carefully placed mirrors in the barn cupola that allowed him to watch the valley approaches, or the cached weapons hidden throughout the property, each cleaned weekly when the hands were away, or the fact that Thomas knew every ridge, cave and hollow within 20 miles of his land. When Sarah asked why he'd chosen this particular valley, he'd spin tales about good water rights and fertile soil. He never mentioned how the terrain offered perfect ambush points, or how the river's bend created a natural barrier against surprise attacks. Some knowledge was better left unshared, some skills better left forgotten. That morning, as Thomas watched, Sarah practiced her roping in the corral. Jamie Ross rode up on his paint horse. The boy's smile carried no threat, his wave friendly as summer sunshine. But Thomas noticed how the young man's gun belt rode low, how his right hand never strayed, far from its grip, little tells that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read them. "Morning, Mr. Green," Jamie called out, all politeness and charm. "Think we might discuss them spring calves?" Thomas nodded, maintaining his careful shuffle as he moved toward the corral fence. "Sure, boy. Sarah, why don't you fetch our guest? Some coffee?" As his daughter hurried inside, Thomas studied Jamie Ross with eyes that had once tracked men across 5 territories. The boy's father, Matthew Ross, had been asking a lot of questions lately. About water rights, about cattle paths, about the strange sounds some claimed to hear from Circle Cross at night. "Your pa still planning that big drive come spring?" Thomas asked, his voice quavering just enough. Jamie leaned against the fence, trying to look casual but betraying his tension in a dozen tiny ways. "Yes, sir. Hoping to take the herd clear to Wyoming this year." Thomas nodded, calculating distances and timing in his head. Wyoming meant the Echo Canyon Trail, meant narrow passes and blind corners, meant perfect places for an ambush. If someone was of such a mind, the coffee would give them time to talk, time for Thomas to assess whether Jamie Ross was truly sweet on his daughter or playing a deeper game. Time to decide if the boy's questions were innocent or if, like so many others before him, he'd somehow caught the scent of a past that refused to stay buried. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Thomas's shoulder ached with the coming weather, the old bullet singing its familiar song of violence and regret. Change was coming to Bitter Valley, carrying with it echoes of a life he'd tried so hard to leave behind. Marshal Wade and his men took their time approaching the Circle Cross Ranch, their horses' hooves kicking up dust that mixed with the threatening storm clouds above. Thomas watched from his porch, making sure his hands shook visibly as he gripped his walking stick. He'd sent Sarah to the root cellar, accessible through a hidden trap door beneath the kitchen rug. The girl had argued, of course, but some tones. A voice bypassed the argument and went straight to obedience. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Thomas called out, his voice wavering perfectly. "What brings the law all the way out to my humble spread?" Wade dismounted with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, his false badge catching the last rays of sunlight before the storm swallowed them. Two of his men flanked him, a scarred giant they called Bear, and a wiry fellow whose eyes never stopped moving. The fourth rider, a younger man with a Confederate cavalry slouch, maintained his position by the gate. Mr. Green. Wade touched the brim of his hat, all courtesy wrapped around the threat. Hoping you might help us with a peculiar situation. Seems some of our deputies went missing last week right around these parts. Thomas let his rheumy eyes widen with manufactured concern. Missing lawmen? Lord above, that's terrible news. Can't say I've seen anything unusual, though. Been laid up with my joints acting up something fierce. Bear snorted, clearly unimpressed by the old man's performance. But Wade's smile only grew sharper, more knowing. He moved closer to the porch, boots creaking on each step. Interesting thing about them deputies, Wade continued, closing the distance. Last anyone saw, they were trailing a fugitive. Fellow who'd stolen quite a sum from the territorial bank in Helena. Trail led them right through your valley. Thunder rolled overhead as Thomas adjusted his grip on the walking stick. Within its hollow core, a shotgun barrel waited. Lots of folks pass through Bitter Valley. Can't say I pay much mind to them anymore. Age has a way of turning a man's thoughts inward. That's so. Wade was close enough now that Thomas could smell tobacco and gun oil on him. Because Morton over at the store seems to think you've been mighty interested in visitors lately. Buying extra supplies, asking about strangers in town. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A gust of wind scattered leaves across the yard, and Thomas caught a glimpse of Jamie, Ross's paint horse hidden in the tree line. The boy hadn't left after all. Foolish, but it might prove useful. Getting old makes a man cautious, Thomas explained, letting a tremor enter his voice. These days, I like to know who's about, times being what they are. Wade's hand shot out, faster than a man his size should move, and grabbed Thomas's collar. The other men tensed, expecting resistance, but Thomas just wheezed and trembled like any frightened old-timer would. You know what I think? Wade's breath was hot against Thomas's face. I think you know exactly what happened to my men. I think all this doddering old fool act is just that, an act. The way this ranch is laid. Oh, the way you've got sightlines to every approach. This ain't no regular rancher's design. Thomas allowed a single bead of sweat to roll down his temple, even as his mind catalogued the positions of Wade's men. Bear had moved to cover the barn's main door, but he couldn't see the side entrance. The wiry one watched the house windows, while the youngest still held the gate, all exactly where Thomas would have placed them if their positions were reversed. I'm just a rancher, Thomas insisted, his voice cracking. Been one going on 15 years now. Before that, I worked at a shop in St. Louis, never even fired a gun until I came west. Wade's grip tightened. That so? Then you won't mind if my men take a look around. Been hearing interesting stories about Circle Cross, hidden rooms, secret passages, the kind of setup a man might need if he was expecting trouble. A raindrop hit the porch roof with a sound like a distant gunshot. Then another and another. The storm was finally breaking. Now see here. Thomas straightened slightly, letting some backbone show through his fear, just enough to be believable. You may wear a badge, but this is my property. You can't just... Wade's backhand caught him across the face, sending him sprawling. The walking stick clattered across the porch boards, rolling to a stop against the wall. Thomas tasted blood and something else, the familiar copper penny taste of violence approaching. Search everything, Wade ordered his men. Tear it apart if you have to. Old man here's hiding something, and I mean to know what. Bear kicked. In the front door, while the wiry one circled toward the back, Thomas lay where he'd fallen, seeming to struggle for breath, but his eyes caught movement in an upstairs window. Sarah, who should have been safely hidden below, stood with his Winchester in her hands. The fool girl must have doubled back through the tunnel that connected the root cellar to the barn. Now she was positioning herself for a shot, just like Jamie Ross had been teaching her. But Thomas knew her hands weren't steady enough, her skills not quite there. If she fired and missed... Rain began falling in earnest as Bear emerged from the house. "Nothing on the first floor, boss. But we found this." He held up a wooden box containing spare ammunition, hidden in a false drawer, real professional work. Wade grabbed Thomas by his shirt front, hauling him up. "Want to explain that, old-timer? Don't recall many shopkeepers knowing how to build hidden compartments." "Man's entitled to protect his property," Thomas wheezed, playing for time. Through the rain he could see Jamie Ross moving closer, using the weather for cover. The boy might complicate things. "Bear, check the barn," Wade commanded. "Olson, get up those stairs. I want every inch of this place turned inside out." Thomas's mind raced. If they found the tunnel entrance, they'd know Sarah was loose in the house. If they discovered the weapons caches, his cover would be blown. And if Sarah took that shot... The decision was made for him when Bear kicked open the barn door and immediately ducked back as a bullet splintered the wood beside his head. One of Thomas's ranch hands, young Billy Tucker, had apparently decided to play hero. "Got a shooter in the barn!" Bear bellowed, drawing his gun. The sound of Billy's Winchester, working its lever, echoed across the yard, followed by more shots. Bear and Olson both returned fire, forcing Billy to retreat deeper into the barn. Wade's grip on Thomas's shirt tightened. "Seems your hands are a mite more aggressive than most ranch workers," Wade observed coldly. "Almost like they were expecting trouble, almost like they were hired for something besides cattle work." Thomas saw Sarah steadying the rifle at the window, saw Jamie Ross moving into position behind the rain barrel, saw Billy's desperate situation in the barn. The facade he'd built so carefully was crumbling, and people would die if he maintained it much longer. A decision crystallized in his mind, sharp and clear as the first time he'd ever drawn against another man. Sometimes the only way to protect a lie was to kill it yourself. "You're right about one thing," Thomas said, his voice suddenly steady and cold as mountain winter. "This ain't no regular ranch." His arthritis-twisted hands moved with liquid speed, producing a derringer from his sleeve. Before Wade could react, Thomas pressed the small gun's twin barrels against the false marshal's ribs. "But you're wrong about St. Louis," he continued, all pretense of age and weakness vanishing. "I've never been further east than Denver. Name's not really Thomas Green either. 30 years back, folks used to call me Left-Hand Lawrence Morgan." Wade's face went slack with recognition. Even out here, that name still carried weight. Lawrence Morgan, the man who'd outshot the Hastings gang with his offhand after taking a bullet in his right. The ghost that had hunted down the Carson City bank robbers one by one. The legend that had disappeared without a trace after the Abilene incident. "That's a dead man's name," Wade whispered. Thomas Lawrence smiled grimly. "Lots of dead men's names in my past, about to be a few more unless you call your boys off real careful like." The rain fell harder now, drumming against the tin roof of the porch like distant gunfire. Wade's men held their positions, muscles tense, waiting for their leader's word. Inside the house, Sarah maintained her aim from the upstairs window, while Jamie Ross stayed hidden behind the rain barrel, his presence still unknown to Wade's crew. "Lawrence Morgan," Wade repeated, testing the name like a man checking the edge of a knife. "Heard tell you died in that fire in Abilene. 15, maybe. 20 years back. Rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated." Thomas, now revealed as Lawrence, kept the derringer pressed firm against Wade's ribs. "Now, how about you tell me what this is really about? Because we both know you're no more a marshal than I'm a simple rancher." Wade's laugh carried no humor. "You really don't know, do you? All these years playing farmer, and you never figured out why this valley was so cheap when you bought it?" A new tension crept into Lawrence's shoulders. He'd chosen Bitter Valley for its defensive position, its isolation. The price had seemed a blessing at the time. Now he wondered if it had been bait in a trap long in the springing. Plenty of cheap land in Montana territory, Lawrence said carefully, watching Wade's men for any sudden moves. Bear still covered. The barn where Billy was pinned down, while Olson kept his gun trained on the house. Not like this piece, Wade grinned, seemingly unconcerned about the derringer. You built yourself a real nice ranch here, Morgan. Real nice operation, right on top of about 200,000 in gold dust and banknotes. The revelation hit Lawrence like a physical blow. The Helena bank job, 10 years back. Finally, the old gunslinger catches up. Wade's voice dripped with mockery. Biggest heist in territorial history. My crew had it all planned perfectly. Hit the bank, ride hard for Bitter Valley, stash the take in the caves up by Miller's Creek. Only something went wrong. Bank guard got lucky, shot our mapman. Rest of us had to split up, circle back later. Lawrence's mind raced through implications. But when you come back, found a nice little ranch being built, right where we needed to dig. Wade's eyes hardened. Spent 10 years trying to figure out how to get our gold back. Watch you build. Your defenses. Hire your hands careful like. Almost convinced myself you knew about the money all along. The irony might have been funny if it weren't so deadly. All his precautions, his carefully maintained facade, had only convinced Wade's. Gang he was guarding their lost fortune. A shout from the barn interrupted them. Bear had worked his way closer to the door where Billy was hiding. "Boss, found something. Hidden door in the floor leads to some kind of tunnel." Lawrence felt the situation slipping. If they found the tunnel network he'd built connecting the buildings, they'd eventually find Sarah in the house, and the girl, for all her spirit, wasn't ready for this kind of fight. "Olson," Wade called to his wiry watchman. "Check the house again, top to bottom. Old man here's been busy with more than just ranch work." But before Olson could move, a new voice cut through the rain. "That'd be unwise, mister." Jamie Ross had finally decided to show his hand, stepping out from behind the rain barrel with his gun trained on Olson. The young man's stance was perfect, his aim rock steady despite the weather. "Well now," Wade's smile grew wider. "Seems the Ross boys chosen a side. Your pa know you're mixed up in this, son?" "My pa knows exactly where I am," Jamie replied, his voice carrying an edge Lawrence hadn't heard before. "Just like he knew where I was last week when your deputies tried pushing into Miller's Creek. Man's got a right to protect his property." The pieces clicked together in Lawrence's mind. Matthew Ross's questions about water rights, the careful way he'd been probing about Circle Cross's defenses. The man hadn't been suspicious. He'd been looking for an ally. Ross and his bunch. "Have been giving you trouble?" Lawrence asked Wade, keeping his voice casual despite the derringer still pressed to the false marshal's ribs. Wade spat into the mud. "Been claiming Miller's Creek as his water right. Running off anyone tries to. Search up there, almost like he's guarding something. Or someone," Jamie added coldly. "Like the real Marshal Phillips, who came asking questions last month. Man disappeared awful suddenly like, didn't he, Wade?" The accusation hung in the rain-heavy air. Lawrence had heard about Phillips going missing, but he'd been too focused on maintaining his own cover to investigate. Another mistake. A sudden shot cracked from the barn, Billy making another try for freedom, and the yard erupted into chaos. Bear returned fire, splintering wood. Olson, distracted by the noise, turned slightly from Jamie's position. Wade, tensed, ready to move. "Sarah!" Lawrence shouted, dropping all pretense. "Take the shot!" His daughter's rifle thundered from the upstairs window. The bullet caught Olson in the shoulder, spinning him into the mud. Jamie immediately shifted his aim to Bear, forcing the big man to dive for cover behind a water trough. Wade chose that moment to move, driving an elbow back toward Lawrence's face. But the old gunslinger hadn't survived 30 years of violence by being predictable. He was already sliding sideways, derringer barking twice. The first shot went wide, but the second tore through Wade's gun belt, sending his revolver falling. Into the mud. You've got grit, girl, Wade shouted toward the window where Sarah's rifle still waited. But your pa's teaching you wrong. Never wound a man you mean to kill. As if to prove his point, Olsen was already rolling, drawing his backup gun. Jamie's shot kicked up dirt near the fallen man's head, but didn't connect. Bear used the distraction to make a dash for the barn's side door, likely aiming to flank Billy's position. Lawrence had retrieved his walking stick in the confusion, and now the hollow core slid apart, revealing the shotgun within. All pretense of age and weakness vanished as he worked the action with practiced speed. "Sarah!" he called out. "Remember where we stashed the blasting powder?" "Yes, sir." Her voice carried a tremor, but her rifle stayed steady. "Good girl. When I give the word, put a shot right into that crate by the barn door. Jamie, you get to, or cover. Billy, get clear of that barn." Wade, sprawled in the mud but still grinning, seemed to guess Lawrence's plan. "You'll bring the whole place down." "Better than letting you find what's beneath it," Lawrence answered grimly. All those hidden rooms and passages he'd built, they'd serve one final purpose. But before he could give the order, horse hooves thundered from the valley road. Through the curtain of rain, Lawrence made out a line of riders approaching fast. Leading them was Matthew Ross himself, and beside him, "Is that who I think it is?" Jamie called out, still covering Olsen with his gun. Lawrence nodded slowly, recognizing the tall figure riding at Ross's side. The same man he'd once called friend, before Abilene. Before the fire that was supposed to have claimed Lawrence Morgan's life. "That's Marshal Kane," he confirmed. "The real one, man who helped me fake my death all those years ago." Wade's laughter carried a note of desperation now. "More of your secrets, Morgan. How deep does this hole of lies go?" Lawrence chambered a shell in the shotgun, eyes never leaving the approaching riders. "Deep enough to bury us all, if we're not careful. Question is, who's getting buried today?" Thunder rolled across Bitter Valley like God's own warning shot. The storm was about to break in full, and with it every secret Lawrence Morgan had spent 15 years trying to keep. The approaching riders spread out in a practiced formation that Lawrence recognized all too well. It was one he'd taught. Kane himself, back when they'd ridden together. Matthew Ross took the center, while Kane and his deputies covered the flanks. They'd have the yard surrounded in moments. "Sarah," Lawrence called out, keeping his voice steady. "Remember that back trail we practiced, the one through Miller's Creek?" "Yes, Pa." Her voice shook slightly, but her rifle remained steady. "Time to use it. Take Billy with you when he clears the barn." "I'm not leaving you." The steel in her voice reminded him so much of her mother that it physically hurt. "Not asking, girl. Some debts need settling, and I aim to settle them clean." Lawrence shifted his grip on the shotgun, watching Wade's men tense at the movement. "Jamie, your pa's likely got plans of his own. Choose your ground carefully." Jamie's response was cut off by Matthew Ross's booming voice. "Wade! Lawrence! Throw down your weapons, and let's talk this through civilized." Lawrence almost smiled at that. Civilized talks didn't usually start with a dozen armed men surrounding your home, but Ross was playing a deeper game. He had to have brought Kane into this. Wade, still in the mud but watching everything with snake-sharp eyes, called back, "Ain't nothing here needs talking about, Ross. This is between me and the old man." "This stopped being just about you the moment you killed Marshal Phillips." Kane's voice carried the weight of official justice, but Lawrence caught the undertone of personal vendetta. "We found his body up in Miller's Creek, right where you stashed that Helena gold, I reckon." The revelation hit the yard like another thunderclap. Bear and Olsen exchanged nervous glances, while Wade's face darkened with fury. "You were supposed to be dead," Wade snarled at Lawrence. "Both of you. That fire in Abilene." "Funny thing." "About fires," Kane replied, edging his horse closer. "They have a way of cleaning slates, giving men fresh starts. Ain't that right, Lawrence?" Memory flashed hot as burning timber. Abilene, 15 years ago, the bank vault empty, the money gone. Kane offers a way out, a chance to walk away clean. All it would cost was Lawrence Morgan's name and reputation. "Some slates don't stay clean," Lawrence answered, watching Bear try to work his way behind a rain barrel. "No matter how hard you scrub them." The sound of Billy finally breaking from the barn drew everyone's attention. The young hand sprinted through the rain toward the house, but instead of following Sarah's escape route, he dove through the front door. "Damn fool kid," Lawrence muttered. But he knew why Billy had done it. The ranch hands had their own orders, their own part to play in the defenses Lawrence had spent years preparing. Wade seized the momentary distraction to roll toward his fallen gun, but Lawrence's shotgun blast kicked up mud inches from his reaching fingers. "Still quick for an old man," Wade admitted, freezing in place. "Age is just another lie," Lawrence replied, "like badges, like names, like lawmen who hunt bank robbers just to steal their takes." Kane's horse shifted nervously at that last part. Lawrence saw the moment his old friend realized he knew the truth about Abilene. "Wasn't supposed to go that way," Kane said quietly. "If you'd just played along. You mean if I'd let you pin the robbery on me?" Lawrence kept his voice steady, despite the old anger rising. "Let you walk away with the money while I take the blame?" Ross cut through the tension. "This can end peacefully. Wade's crew goes to jail for Phillips's murder. The gold goes back to Helena. Everyone else walks away." "Like hell!" Wade's laugh held no humor. "You think your boy Jamie's been courting Morgan's girl out of pure affection? Been watching this place for months, ain't you, Ross? Looking for your own shot at that gold." The accusation struck Lawrence like a physical blow. He looked at Jamie, saw the guilt flash across the young man's face before being replaced by determination. "Started that way," Jamie admitted, gun still trained on Olson. "But things change. People change." Sarah's voice drifted down from the window, tight with betrayal. "Jamie Ross, I'm going to shoot you myself when this is over." The rain intensified, drumming against the tin roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. Through the curtain of water, Lawrence saw more movement in the tree line. Wade's fourth man, the one who'd held back at the gate, was working his way around the yard's edge. But there was something off about his movement, something that tugged at Lawrence's instincts. Then he noticed Kane's deputies shifting their positions, not to contain the situation, but to create a crossfire. Not aimed at Wade's men, but at Ross's group. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. Kane hadn't come to arrest Wade. He'd come to eliminate witnesses. Anyone who knew about the Abilene job, about Helena Gold, about Kane's own corrupt past. Clean all the slates at once, bury every secret in one bloody afternoon. Lawrence had built Circle Cross as a fortress, planning for every contingency. Hidden passages, escape routes, cached weapons, and loyal hands selected for their ability to fight as much as ranch. But he'd never planned for this many layers of betrayal, this many competing schemes, all coming to a head at once. The storm clouds overhead had turned the afternoon dark as twilight. Soon, visibility would be down to arm's length. A good time. For secrets to die, for old debts to be settled permanently. Lawrence felt the weight of his choices pressing down, harder than any rain. He could run, the tunnels would get him clear before anyone could follow, could let these vultures tear each other apart over gold he hadn't even known about. Sarah was probably already halfway to the backup ranch, assuming she'd actually followed his orders for once. But running meant living with one more lie, one more slate left dirty, and Lawrence Morgan had spent 15 years drowning in lies, suffocating under the weight of Thomas Green's peaceful existence. The shotgun felt right in his hands, honest in a way that walking stick never had. Perhaps it was time to show them all why left-hand Lawrence Morgan's name had once been whispered with fear from Texas to Montana. "Sarah," he called out one last time, "your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Remember that." Then, Lawrence Morgan, The deadliest gunslinger most had thought long dead, stepped off his porch into the rain-soaked yard. Sometimes the only way to bury the past was to dig the grave yourself. The rain carved muddy rivers through Circle Cross's yard as Lawrence stepped away from the shelter of his porch. Behind him, 15 years of careful deception lay shattered. Ahead, a dozen men with guns waited to see what left-hand Lawrence Morgan would do next. But it was Sarah's presence at that upstairs window that weighed heaviest on his mind. "Girl," he called out, not turning around, "remember that story I told you about the wolf I found in my trap? The one I couldn't bring myself to shoot." "Yes, Pa." Sarah's voice carried a mix of confusion and fear, but her rifle remained steady. "Told you I let it go, because everything deserves a chance at freedom." Lawrence's eyes tracked Kane's deputies as they shifted positions. "Never tell you the whole truth. Let it go because it reminded me of myself, trapped by choices, desperate to escape." Wade's mocking laugh cut through the rain. "The legendary left-hand Morgan, gone soft over a trapped wolf? What other fairy tales have you been telling, old man?" "Shut up, Wade." Jamie Ross's voice carried unexpected authority. "Man's talking to his daughter." Lawrence allowed himself a small smile at that. Maybe the boy wasn't completely corrupted by his father's schemes after all. "Sarah," he continued, "that wolf came back 3 weeks later. Led me to her den, showed me her pups. One of them was hurt, dying. She remembered I'd shown mercy, trusted me to help." He paused, letting the memory settle. "That pup grew into the finest hunting dog I ever had. Loyalty once earned runs deeper than blood." Understanding bloomed in Sarah's voice. "Like Billy and the other hands, you gave them chances when nobody else would." "Gave me more than a chance," Billy called from inside the house. "Gave me back my life after that business in Deadwood. Ain't about to forget that, boss." The rain drummed harder as Lawrence's carefully assembled family revealed itself. One by one, ranch hands emerged from hidden positions around the yard. Tom Hawkins on the stable roof, rifle ready. Miguel Ortiz behind the woodpile, twin revolvers, gleaming. Even old Jake Chen, who everyone thought was half-blind, appeared at the bunkhouse door with a shotgun. "Well now," Matthew Ross's voice carried grudging respect, "you've been building more than just a ranch here, Lawrence." "Man's entitled to choose his family," Lawrence replied, then turned to face Sarah directly. "Just like he's entitled to tell them the truth when it's time." The moment stretched, heavy with 15 years of unspoken history. Sarah's rifle wavered slightly. "That night I found you in the barn," Lawrence said softly. "You weren't running from rustlers like you claimed, were you?" Sarah's breath caught audibly. "Pa, don't! You were running from Kane's men. They'd killed your real father, Marshal Phillips, and you saw their faces." The revelation hit the yard like a lightning strike. Kane's deputies tensed, while Wade's cruel laugh rang out again. "Oh, this is rich," Wade crowed. "The great Marshal Kane hunting down a little girl. What happened to your famous Justice, Kane?" "Shut up." Kane's voice carried deadly promise. "Lawrence, you're speaking dangerous words." "Truth's always dangerous. To men like you," Lawrence replied. "Sarah saw you murder her father when he got too close to your connection with the Helena robbery. She ran, smart girl that she was, and fate or luck or God himself led her to my barn." Sarah's voice shook. "You knew? All this time?" "Knew the moment I saw you, girl. You had that same look I used to see in the mirror. Someone running from a past they didn't deserve." Lawrence's voice gentled. "Didn't matter then why you were running. Only mattered that you needed help. Same as Billy, same as Jake, same as all the strays I've taken in." "Quite the confession," Kane observed coldly. "Almost sounds like a dying man's last words." Lawrence nodded slowly. "Maybe they are, but they're honest words, something you wouldn't understand, old friend." Jamie Ross suddenly spoke up. "Pa, you knew about this? About Kane killing Marshal Phillips?" Matthew Ross's face was a mask of carefully controlled rage. "Son, there are things Things like using me to spy on Sarah? Jamie's gun shifted slightly, no longer covering Olson. Things like pretending to be honest ranchers while we helped Kane hunt down an innocent girl? The yard's tensions twisted, realigning like a kaleidoscope. Wade's men seemed forgotten as Kane's deputies and Ross's riders faced each other with growing hostility. Lawrence saw Sarah's rifle steady again, saw the tears on her face replaced by cold determination. The girl had her real father's steel. "All right, you killed my pa," she said, addressing Kane directly. "Shot him in the back while he was reading my letter. I was supposed to be asleep, but I saw everything." Kane's hand drifted toward his gun. "Dangerous memories, girl. Better off staying buried like your father." "Only things getting buried today are lies," Lawrence declared. "Sarah, remember that box under my bed? The one I told you never to open?" "Yes." "Pa? Time to open it. Inside you'll find papers, letters, evidence your father collected about Kane's dealings. Proof about Abilene, about Helena, about a dozen other robberies." Lawrence's voice carried across the rain-soaked yard. "Kept them safe all these years, old friend. Insurance against a day like this." Kane's facade finally cracked. "You sanctimonious bastard. Playing both sides all these years, pretending to be my friend while you gathered evidence against me?" "Wasn't pretending." Lawrence's voice carried genuine regret. "Friendship was real, same as it was in Abilene. You chose to throw it away for gold, both times." Wade, who had been inching toward his fallen gun, suddenly laughed. "It doesn't matter anymore. Papers can burn, witnesses can die. Gold's all that matters in the end." "Really, Wade?" Lawrence's smile was cold as a mountain winter. "Tell that to the men I've got positioned in the tree line, the ones with rifles aimed at every man jack of you." It was a bluff. He had no extra men hidden away. But 15 years of watching Wade's type told him the man would look. The moment. Wade's eyes flickered toward the trees. Lawrence moved. The shotgun roared, turning Wade's fallen revolver into useless scrap. Kane's draw was legendary fast, but Lawrence had always been faster. His second shot caught Kane's gun hand, sending the marshal's weapon spinning. "Billy!" Lawrence shouted. "Light it up!" The young ranch hand struck a match inside the house, and suddenly the yard blazed with light. Lanterns, carefully positioned and hidden over years, illuminated every shadow and hiding spot. No place left for secrets to hide. "Sarah," Lawrence called out, his voice carrying fresh purpose. "Time for truth. All of it. Tell these men exactly what you saw that night. Tell them about your father's investigation. Tell them about Kane's real business." As Sarah's clear voice began to speak, Lawrence watched years of carefully laid plans and hidden agendas crumble in the rain. Sometimes, he reflected, the only way to bury the past was to dig it up first, expose every ugly truth to the light. The storm raged on above Circle Cross Ranch, but for the first time in 15 years, Lawrence Morgan felt truly clean. "My father," Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong, "was investigating a series of bank robberies across 3 territories. He found a pattern: lawmen who arrived too late, evidence that disappeared, witnesses who conveniently died or vanished." Kane's face had gone pale beneath his weather-beaten tan. Matthew Ross kept shooting glances at his son, who stood firm with his gun now pointed squarely at his own father's men. "Keep talking, girl," Lawrence encouraged, his shotgun never wavering. "Tell them about the ledger." Sarah's voice grew harder. "Pa, my real pa, he kept a ledger, names, dates, amounts. Every robbery Kane was connected to, every deputy who looked the other way, every judge who dropped charges for a cut of the take." "That ledger burned," Kane snarled. "Burned with Philip's house. Copies didn't." Lawrence allowed himself a grim smile. "Sarah memorized the important parts before she ran, and I've spent 15 years verifying every detail, adding my own notes, building a case that would stand up in any court from here to Washington." Billy moved to the window beside Sarah, his own rifle adding to her coverage. The ranch hands had formed a tight circle of steel around the yard, each man watching their section with the discipline Lawrence had drilled into them. You wonder why? I hired men like Billy, Lawrence addressed the yard at large. Men with troubled pasts, men running from mistakes, because they understand the value of second chances, of loyalty earned, not bought. Like Jake Chen, Sarah added, pride evident in her voice. Everyone thinks he's just a simple cook. Nobody bothered to learn he was once the best scout in the Arizona Territory before a false murder charge ruined his name. The old Chinese man tipped his hat slightly, his shotgun never wavering. "Mr. Morgan gave me back my honor," he said simply. "Some debts cannot be repaid with gold." Wade, still sprawled in the mud, laughed bitterly. "Honor in this business? Ask your precious pa about Abilene girl. About the men who died in that fire. About how Kane set it up," Lawrence cut in. "About how he arranged for the bank to be robbed, then planned to blame it all on me. Oh, I know all about Abilene now. Took years to piece it together. But Sarah's father's investigation filled in the last gaps." Jamie Ross suddenly spoke up. "Pa, all those trips to Helena, those meetings with Kane, you were part of this? All of it?" Matthew Ross's shoulders sagged slightly. "Jamie, you don't understand. After your mother died, we were losing the ranch. Kane offered a way out. There's always a way out," Lawrence said quietly. "Just depends on what you're willing to pay. Sarah's father paid with his life for choosing honor. I paid with 15 years of hiding. What did your choice cost you, Matt?" The question hung in the rain-heavy air. Then Sarah's voice came again, softer now. "Jamie, that day you taught me to shoot. Was that real, or just part of your pa's plan?" The young man's face twisted with emotion. "Started as my pa's orders. But Sarah, everything changed. You changed me, made me see there's more to life than schemes and easy money." "Touching," Kane sneered, but Lawrence caught the calculation in his old friend's eyes. The corrupt marshal was looking for angles, weaknesses to exploit. "Sarah," Lawrence called out, "remember what else was in that box under my bed? Besides the papers." "Yes, Pa." A smile crept into her voice. "The silver locket with the picture inside." Kane's head snapped up. "What locket?" "The one your wife gave you," Lawrence said softly. "Before you got her killed in that first bank job. The one that started you down this road." The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. His face drained of all color, and for the first time, his iron control cracked completely. "You swore you'd never speak of her," he whispered. "Lots of promises got broken over the years, old friend, but keeping that locket, that was one I kept. Reminder of who you used to be. The man who taught me about justice, about doing what's right, no matter the cost." The rain seemed to soften, becoming less of a torrent and more of a gentle washing, like the land itself was being cleansed of old sins. "Circle Cross isn't just a ranch," Lawrence continued, addressing everyone in the yard. "It's a second chance. For Sarah, running from her father's killers. For Billy, falsely accused of murder. For Jake, driven from his home by lies. Even for me, trying to wash away the blood of Abilene." He turned to Kane, and his voice gentled slightly. "Could have been a second chance for you too, old friend, if you'd just remembered what that badge really means." The tension in the yard shifted again, but differently now. Wade's men looked uncertain, while Ross's riders seemed to be weighing their options. Even Kane's deputies exchanged troubled glances. "So here's how this plays out," Lawrence declared. "Sarah has copies of everything. Her father's evidence, my own investigations, details of every robbery and murder. If anything happens here, today, if one drop of blood is spilled, those papers go to every newspaper and marshal's office in the territory." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or we can end this clean. Kane, Wade, you surrender to proper authorities. Ross, you come clean about your part in it. Everyone else rides away. takes their second chance while it's still being offered. The yard fell silent except for the softening rain. 15 years of lies and hidden motives hung in the balance. Lawrence watched faces, reading the shifts in loyalty, the calculations of risk versus reward. Then Sarah's voice came again, strong and clear as a church bell. "Pa, my real pa used to say that a man's character is measured not by his mistakes, but by how he fixes them." Lawrence smiled, feeling the weight of Thomas Green's deception finally falling away completely. "Wise man, your father. What do you say, Kane? Ready to fix some mistakes?" The storm above Circle Cross began to clear, bands of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Sometimes, Lawrence reflected, redemption came not from burying the past, but from letting it be washed clean in the light of truth. Sunlight pierced the breaking storm clouds, casting strange shadows across Circle Cross's muddy yard. Kane stood, silent, his gun hand still bleeding from Lawrence's shot, while Sarah's revelation about the ledger and evidence hung in the air like gun smoke. "You want to know about mistakes?" Kane finally spoke, his voice carrying an edge of bitter memory. "Let me tell you about Lawrence Morgan's biggest mistake. Abilene wasn't the beginning. It was the end of something that started years before." Lawrence's grip tightened on his shotgun. "Kane, no, old friend. If we're airing secrets, let's air them all." Kane's eyes locked onto Sarah. "You think you know your adopted pa? Let me tell you about Carson City, 1863. Lawrence's face hardened. "That's a dead story. Dead as the 12 men you hunted down." Kane's smile was razor-sharp. "Dead as Marshal Wade's father." Wade's head snapped up from his position in the mud. "What? Your pa wasn't just another bank robber," Kane continued. "He was Lawrence's partner, his friend, right up until Lawrence put 3 bullets in him." The yard's tension shifted again, as Wade struggled to his feet, rage burning through his caution. "Are you saying Morgan killed my father?" "I'm saying there's more to every story," Kane replied. "Why don't you tell them, Lawrence? Tell them about Emma Wade." The name hit Lawrence like a physical blow. Sarah's rifle wavered slightly at the window as she caught the pain that flashed across her adopted father's face. "Emma Wade was the reason," Lawrence said quietly. "The reason I hunted those 12 men. The reason I became what I became." Jamie Ross, still covering his father's men, spoke up. "Who was she?" "My wife," Lawrence answered, his voice hollow with old grief. "And Wade's stepmother." The revelation rippled through the yard. Wade's face twisted with complex emotion, while his men exchanged uncertain glances. "Pa never talked about her," Wade said, his voice suddenly younger, uncertain. "Because he was ashamed," Kane cut in. "Ashamed of what he and his friends did to her. Weren't you there that night, Wade? Just a boy watching from the stairs?" "I remember screaming." Wade's voice had lost its swagger. "Pa said it was just a nightmare." Lawrence's next words carried the weight of decades. "It wasn't a nightmare. Your father and his gang, 12 men who thought they were above all law, they came to our home. I was away, tracking a fugitive. His voice caught. Emma fought back. They killed her for it." Sarah's soft intake of breath carried clearly in the sudden silence. "When I returned," Lawrence continued, "I found her. Found their tracks. Found you, boy, hiding in the root cellar where she'd put you to keep you safe. Even dying, she protected an innocent child." Wade's legs seemed to give out, dropping him back to his knees in the mud. I can't remember." "You were only 6, Lawrence said gently. "She'd been kind to you, hadn't she? Treat you like her own, even though you were just her husband's son from another marriage. She used to sing to me." Wade's voice cracked. At night, when the storms came, Kane's attempt to exploit old wounds had backfired. Instead of turning Wade against Lawrence, the truth was unraveling years of hatred built on lies. "After I found her," Lawrence went on, "I made a choice. 12 men had to answer for what they'd done. I tracked them one by one, not as a lawman, not for justice, for vengeance. And that's when I found him, Cain added, half dead in the desert after killing the 11th man. Brought him back, gave him a badge, tried to turn his revenge into something legitimate. Lawrence nodded slowly. Worked for a while. Cain taught me to use the law instead of just my gun, to be something more than a killer. Until Abilene showed me he'd lost his way, started using that same law for his own profit. The sun broke through, fully now, turning puddles into mirrors across the yard. In their reflection, Lawrence caught glimpses of movement, his ranch hands slowly repositioning, maintaining their cover of the yard while this history unfolded. Your father was the last one, Lawrence told Wade. The leader, the one I saved. And for the end, but when I finally cornered him, he begged for mercy. Not for himself, for you. Said you had no one else. Wade's hands clenched in the mud. You still killed him. Yes. Lawrence's honesty was brutal, because some crimes can't be forgiven. But I made sure you were taken in by good people. Watch from a distance as you grow up, until you fell in with Cain here and started walking your father's path. Sarah's voice drifted down from the window, thick with emotion. Is that why you took me in, Pa? Because of her? Partly, Lawrence admitted, but mostly because you needed help, same as all the strays I've gathered here, same as Wade needed. Help back then, though he never knew it was me paying for his schooling through third parties. This revelation seemed to hit Wade harder than any physical blow. You what? Emma would have wanted it, Lawrence said simply. She loved you like her own. Couldn't dishonor her memory by abandoning you completely. Cain tried to regain control of the situation. Touching story. Almost makes you forget about the dozen men he murdered. 11. Lawrence's correction was soft but firm. Never found the 12th. Man named Clayton Duke, the one who actually killed her. A strange sound came from the direction of the bunkhouse. Old Jake Chen had lowered his shotgun, his weathered face a mask of conflicting emotions. Clayton. Duke, the old cook said carefully, his accent suddenly less pronounced. Haven't heard that name in a long time. Lawrence's shotgun shifted slightly, covering the distance to the bunkhouse. Something you want to share, Jake? Man can change in 20 years, Jake replied. Can learn to regret his choices. Can spend a lifetime trying to make amends. The yard grew absolutely still as understanding dawned. Jake Chen, the man Lawrence had trusted for 5 years, who'd cooked their meals and watched their backs, was the last name on his list of vengeance. All this time, Lawrence breathed. You knew who I was? Jake nodded slowly. Recognized. You the day you hired me. Figured you'd know eventually. Would claim your revenge. Decided to earn my keep until then. Maybe show you I wasn't the same man. Sarah's rifle now covered Jake as well, but her voice shook. You're the one? The one who killed my pa's wife? I was a different person then, Jake said quietly. Young, angry, full of hate, Emma Morgan showed me kindness when I delivered supplies to their home, made me question what I was becoming. When the gang decided to rob them, I tried to talk them out of it, failed, been trying to make up for that failure ever since. Lawrence's mind raced through years of memories, Jake's quiet competence, his fierce loyalty to the ranch, his gentle guidance of Sarah's wilder impulses. The man had saved Lawrence's life twice in firefights with rustlers. 20 years of penance, Lawrence mused, living under the name of a dead Chinese merchant who'd shown you kindness, working for the man you knew would kill you if he discovered the truth. Jake spread his empty hands. Man does what he can to balance his ledger. Cain's laugh held no humor. Another secret revealed. The mighty Lawrence Morgan, sleeping under the same roof as his wife's killer. What's it feel like, old friend? Knowing you've been breaking bread with a man who changed. Lawrence cut him off. A man who chose a better path. Unlike you, Cain. Unlike Wade's father. Unlike all the others who died cursing and unrepentant, Wade struggled to his feet again, his face a storm of emotions. All these years, the nightmares, the anger, the need to prove myself. And you were watching? Trying to keep me from becoming him? Trying and failing, seems like, Lawrence acknowledged. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe none of us are too far gone to choose differently. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. Circle Cross Ranch lay revealed. In the harsh light of truth, not just a home, but a sanctuary for broken men seeking redemption. A place where even a killer like Jake Chen could find a path back to humanity. Sarah's voice carried a lifetime of understanding. Is that why you built this place, Pa? Not just as a fortress, but as a haven? Built it for Emma, Lawrence replied, softly. She always believed in second chances, in mercy, in the power of choice to reshape a soul. His eyes met Jake's across the yard. Took me 20 years to understand what she knew instinctively. There's something else you should know, Jake said, his voice heavy with confession. About the night Emma died, about why your revenge was never complete. Kane's head snapped up, a strange light in his eyes. Jake, he deserves to know, Jake continued, ignoring Kane's warning tone. About the 13th man. Lawrence's shotgun didn't waver, but his voice carried a dangerous edge. There were 12. I counted the tracks myself. 12 who rode to your house, Jake agreed, but one more person who planned it, who gave us the information about when you'd be away, who wants to make an example of what happens to lawmen who don't cooperate. Sarah gasped softly as Lawrence's gaze shifted to Kane. The corrupt marshal's face had gone hard as stone. You were already walking the crooked path back then, Lawrence said quietly. Weren't you, old friend? Emma was going to expose everything, Kane admitted, his mask finally cracking. She'd found my ledger just like Phillips did years later. Such a proper woman, your Emma. So concerned with right and wrong. She wrote me a letter, threatening to tell you about my arrangements with the local gangs. The truth landed like a lead shot in Lawrence's chest. You set it up, all of it. Used Wade's father and his gang to silence her. Tried to make it look like a simple robbery gone wrong. Kane's smile was bitter as winter wind. But Emma Morgan was too damn stubborn to die quietly. She fought back. Recognized Jake here, would have recognized me too if I'd been there myself. Wade struggled to process this new revelation. You used my father. Used me. Used everyone. Kane shrugged. That's what power is, boy. Using people's weaknesses, their hopes, their fears. Like using your hatred of Morgan to keep you loyal. Using Ross's desperation to save his ranch. Using Jake's guilt to keep him in line. But Jake was shaking his head slowly. Not anymore. Lawrence deserves to know everything. About Emma's letter. About where I hid it that night. Kane's hand dropped to his gun belt, forgetting his wounded hand. You swore. Swore to a different man, Jake cut him off. To who I was then. But Emma Morgan showed me kindness when I delivered their supplies. Treated me like a human being, not just some Chinese servant. When things went wrong that night, when she recognized me, she didn't curse me, she forgave me. Lawrence's voice was barely a whisper. She what? Said she could see the shame in my eyes, said it wasn't too late to choose a different path. Jake's weathered face showed decades of carried pain. With her last breath she made me promise to deliver her letter, to help her husband understand why she died. But you never delivered it. Lawrence's words carried no accusation, only a deep sadness. Couldn't face you then. Hid the letter in the one place I knew you'd eventually find. It, Jake's eyes fixed on Sarah, in that silver locket Kane's wife gave him. The one you keep in the box under your bed. The yard erupted into motion. Kane lunged for his fallen gun, despite his wounded hand. Wade scrambled for cover as Lawrence's shotgun swung toward his old friend. Sarah's rifle cracked from the window, kicking up dirt at Kane's feet. But it was Jamie Ross who moved fastest, covering the distance to Kane in 3 long strides. The young man's gun pressed against the corrupt marshal's temple, freezing him in place. "Nobody else moves," Jamie ordered, sounding nothing like the love-struck boy who'd been teaching Sarah to shoot. "Mr. Morgan, I think it's time you read that letter." Lawrence studied Jamie's stance, his unwavering aim. "You've been more than just a rancher's son all along, haven't you?" Matthew Ross spoke up, pride mixing with resignation in his voice. "Tell him, son. Tell him who really sent you to watch Circle Cross." "Territorial Governor's Office," Jamie admitted. "Been investigating Kane for 2 years, getting close to him. Through my father was the only way in. Meeting Sarah, that wasn't part of the plan, but it probably saved my life. Taught me the difference between justice and law." Lawrence nodded slowly, understanding blooming. "That's why you never drew against my men when they caught you snooping. You were counting on my reputation, hoping Left-Hand Morgan would want to hear you out before passing judgment." "Hoped you'd understand about doing what's necessary," Jamie agreed. "About wearing masks to get at the truth." The sun had climbed, ire, burning away the last traces of the storm. Circle Cross Ranch lay exposed in its harsh light, not just a fortress or a haven, but a crossroads where past and present collided, where every soul carried secrets, and each secret carried its own weight of grief and redemption. Lawrence looked at the faces surrounding him. Sarah, the orphaned girl who'd found her strength in his borrowed name. Wade, the angry boy who'd grown into his father's sins without understanding why. Jake, the killer who'd spent 20 years earning back his humanity. Jamie, the lawman hiding behind a lover's smile. Even Kane, his oldest friend turned bitterest enemy, all of them connected by choices made decades ago when Emma Morgan died with forgiveness on her lips and justice in her heart. "Billy!" Lawrence called out, never taking his eyes off Kane. "Fetch that box from under my bed. Time everyone here learned what Emma died to protect. Time we all faced our true reflections." As Billy disappeared into the house, Lawrence allowed himself to feel the full weight of 20 years of vengeance and regret. He'd built Circle Cross as a fortress to protect his lies, as a haven for lost souls seeking redemption. Now it would serve one final purpose, as a place of truth, where old wounds could finally heal in the light of understanding. The storm had passed, but its cleansing work was not yet done. Billy emerged from the house carrying a weathered wooden box, its surface scarred by years of handling. The young ranch hand moved carefully through the muddy yard, aware of how every eye tracked his progress. Even the horses in the corral seemed to sense the tension, their nervous shuffling adding to the thick atmosphere. "Here, boss," Billy said, offering the box to Lawrence. "Found something else, too, hidden in the false bottom beneath the locket." Lawrence's eyes narrowed slightly. In 15 years, he'd never discovered a false bottom in the box, another of Jake's secrets, apparently. "Open it," Kane demanded, still frozen in place by Jamie's gun. "Let's hear what dear Emma's last words were." "Shut up." Jamie pressed his revolver harder against Kane's temple. "Mr. Morgan takes this at his own pace." Lawrence studied the box in Billy's outstretched hands. All these years, he'd kept it as a reminder of his failures. Losing Emma, trusting Kane, letting vengeance consume him. Now it might hold the key to understanding everything. "Sarah," he called out, "this concerns you too. Come down here, girl." "Pa, I've got them covered from up here," she protested. "And my men have them covered from every other angle," Lawrence assured her. "Some truths need to be faced up close." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah's boots could be heard on the stairs. She emerged from the house with her rifle still ready, moving to stand beside Lawrence. Her presence steadied him, just as Emma's once had. Lawrence took the box from Billy, its familiar weight somehow heavier now. The lid creaked open on well-oiled hinges, revealing the silver locket nestled in faded velvet. Beside it lay the stack of papers and documents he'd gathered over the years. evidence of Kane's corruption, carefully collected but never used. "The false bottom," Jake called out from his position by the bunkhouse. "Press the right corner and slide left." Lawrence followed the instructions, and a hidden compartment revealed itself. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age, but preserved by its hiding place. Emma's flowing script adorned the front. "For my beloved Lawrence." Wade made a strange sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "That's... I remember her writing. Like that. Used to help me practice my letters." Lawrence broke the seal with trembling fingers. The paper inside was covered in the same elegant handwriting, though some words were smudged, as if by tears or blood. "My dearest Lawrence," he read aloud, his voice carrying in the stillness. "If you're reading this, then I'm already gone. There are things you need to know, truths that have weighed on my conscience." The letter detailed Kane's corruption, how he'd been using his badge to profit from the very criminals he was supposed to pursue. But it went deeper than that. Emma had uncovered evidence of murders, of witnesses silenced, of judges bought and honest lawmen eliminated. "Kane didn't just work with outlaws," Lawrence continued reading, his voice growing harder. "He created them, set up legitimate businesses for robbery, arranged for good men to be blamed, all while building his reputation as an incorruptible lawman." "Smart woman, your Emma," Kane sneered, but there was fear behind his bravado now. "Too smart for her own good." Lawrence ignored him, focusing on the letter. "But the worst of it, my love, is what he's planning for you. He means to destroy you, to use your reputation as a fearsome lawman against you. He's already arranged for the Carson City Bank to be robbed next month. Means to frame you for it, to turn you into the very thing you've spent your life fighting against." The yard grew absolutely still as the implications sank in. Lawrence's voice shook slightly as he read on. "I confronted him yesterday, threatened to expose everything. He laughed, told me I'd just signed my own death warrant, but I'm not afraid, my love. I've arranged for copies of all my evidence to be sent to trusted friends if anything happens to me. Kane knows this. It's why he'll have to act soon." Sarah stepped closer to her adopted father, her free hand touching his arm in silent support. "There's something else you should know," Lawrence read, "about young Wade. Kane's been poisoning the boy's mind, teaching him to hate his father, telling him that John Wade abandoned him, when in truth, Kane had him killed for refusing to participate in his schemes. The boy deserves to know the truth, deserves a chance at a life unclouded by lies." Wade's legs gave out completely, dropping him to his knees in the mud. His whole world view, built on decades of carefully cultivated hatred, crumbled in the face of Emma's written words. "I've tried to be a mother to the boy," the letter continued, "to show him there's more to life than anger and revenge. If I don't survive what's coming, promise me you'll watch over him. Promise me you won't let Kane twist him into something dark." Lawrence's voice caught. All these years, he'd thought he was secretly helping Wade out of obligation to Emma. Now, he realized she'd planned it, had seen what was coming, and tried to prevent it from beyond the grave. "One last thing, my dearest," he read, each word heavy with emotion. "If Kane's plan succeeds, if you find yourself forced to flee and start a new life, remember this. Vengeance is a poison that kills the soul long before it claims the body. Don't let it consume you. Don't let Kane turn you into what he is." The letter's final words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. "Whatever happens, know that I died trying to protect what you are. A good man, a true lawman, someone who believes in justice rather than just law. Don't let my death change that. Don't let Kane win. All my love, Emma." A single drop of water fell on the letter, and Lawrence realized he was crying. Sarah's hand tightened on his arm, while Billy and the other ranch hands stood in respectful silence. Jake spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "She finished writing that just before we arrived that night. I watched through the window as she sealed it, hid it in the locket." when everything went wrong, when she recognized me. Her last words weren't about the letter. They were about forgiveness. Forgiveness, Kane spat the word like poison. That's what made her weak, what makes all of you weak. You think changing your name, hiding out here playing rancher, taking in strays like some kind of holy man, you think that changes what you are? What are any of us? Jamie's gun never wavered. Seems to me it changes everything. Man can choose what he becomes. Can he? Kane laughed harshly. Ask Morgan here about the 12 men he killed, hunting down Emma's murderers. Ask him if he felt like he had a choice then. Ask Wade if he had a choice about becoming what his father was. But Wade was shaking his head, still on his knees in the mud. She tried to save me. All those years ago, she tried to save me from becoming this. Lawrence carefully refolded the letter, his mind working through 2 decades of lies and manipulation. Emma saw what you really were, Kane. Saw it before any of us. You didn't just want to profit from crime. You wanted to create criminals, to take good men and twist them into something you could use. Someone has to maintain order. Kane's voice took on a zealot's intensity. Law doesn't work without fear, without consequences. I gave people something to fear, something to fight against, made them grateful for the protection of men with badges. Protection you sold to the highest bidder, Jamie added in disgust. Everything has a price, boy. Justice, vengeance, even redemption. Kane's eyes fixed on Lawrence. How much did it cost you to build this place? To maintain your lie? To pretend you're something more than a killer with a conscience? Lawrence's answer was cut off by the sound of approaching horses. More riders were coming up the valley road, drawn by the earlier gunfire. The sun had reached its zenith, casting no shadows across Circle Cross's yard. No place left for secrets to hide. Territorial Rangers. Jamie identified them first. Right. On schedule. Kane's facade finally cracked completely. You didn't just investigate me, did you, boy? You've been building a case. Using Ross. Using this whole situation. Using you, Jamie confirmed coldly. Just like you used everyone else. Difference is, I did it for justice. Real justice, not your twisted version of it. Lawrence watched the approaching riders, their badges catching the sunlight. Real badges. This time, not the false ones Wade's men wore. 20 years of vengeance and regret had led to this moment. Emma's final letter had given him something he hadn't even known he needed. Not just truth, but understanding. The storm had passed, but its work wasn't finished. Some floods didn't just destroy, they uncovered what had long been buried, revealed. Foundations that needed rebuilding. Circle Cross Ranch had been his fortress, his haven, his place of hiding. Now it would become something else, a place of reckoning. The Territorial Rangers approached Circle Cross in a disciplined formation, their horses' hooves kicking up sun-dried mud from the recent storm. Lawrence counted 12 riders, led by a tall man whose silver star caught the midday light, Captain Reynolds, if Jamie's plan had worked as intended. But before the Rangers could reach the yard, Kane made his move. Despite his wounded hand, the corrupt marshal drove his elbow back into Jamie's ribs with desperate strength. As the young man staggered, Kane twisted away, grabbing Sarah's rifle barrel with his good hand and yanking her off balance. "Nobody moves!" Kane's voice cracked with strain as he used Sarah as a shield. "Or the girl joins her real father." Lawrence's shotgun didn't waver, but his heart froze. After everything, the letter, the revelations, the approaching justice, it had come to this. Another woman he loved threatened by Kane's desperation. Let her go, Kane. Lawrence kept his voice steady, remembering Emma's final words about not letting vengeance consume him. "It's over. Been over for 20 years, you just couldn't see it." "Over?" Kane laughed, the sound edged with madness. "Nothing's over until I say it is. Drop your weapons, all of you. Wade, get the horses. We're taking a little ride." But Wade didn't move from his knees in the mud. You killed my father, used my grief, my anger, made me hate an innocent man. Innocent? Kane's grip tightened on Sarah, making her wince. Lawrence. Morgan's killed more men than most outlaws. Ask him about Denver, about the Thompson brothers, about how you arranged each killing. Jamie had regained his feet, his gun aimed steady despite his bruised ribs. How did you manipulate events to force Morgan's hand? It's all in Emma's evidence, all documented in those copies she sent to her friends. Sarah chose that moment to act. Instead of pulling away from Kane's grip, she drove her elbow back while stepping on his injured foot. The move caught him by surprise, but he managed to maintain his hold. "Pa taught me that one," she gasped, as Kane's arm tightened around her throat. "Said always use your opponent's weakness against them." Lawrence saw Kane's fingers flex toward his hidden derringer. "Sarah, down!" She dropped instantly, trusting her adopted father completely. Lawrence's shotgun roared, the blast catching Kane's derringer and taking 2 of his fingers with it. The corrupt marshal screamed, releasing Sarah as he clutched his mangled hand. The territorial rangers were close enough now to witness everything. Captain Reynolds' voice boomed across the yard. "United States Marshals, everyone drop your weapons." "Captain," Jamie called out, maintaining his aim on Kane. "Territorial Agent Ross, sir. Situation is contained but volatile." Lawrence kept his shotgun trained on Kane while addressing the rangers. "Got copies of everything here, Captain. 20 years of evidence about Kane's operations, about the murders, the corruption, all of it. And witnesses," Sarah added, scrambling away from Kane, "living and dead both, thanks to Emma's letter." Kane, cradling his ruined hand, somehow managed to laugh. "Evidence? Witnesses? Captain, this man is Lawrence Morgan, the killer who murdered 12 men in cold blood, who was working under my predecessor's direct orders." Captain Reynolds cut him off, dismounting smoothly. "We found Marshal Phillips' final report. Last week, the one he wrote before you had him killed, the one that confirmed Morgan's original mission was sanctioned." The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. "What?" "The territorial governor needed someone outside official channels," Reynolds explained, his men forming a perimeter around the yard. "Someone who could handle the corruption that was rotting the system from within. Morgan was recruited specifically because of his reputation as a manhunter." Lawrence's mind reeled at this new piece of the puzzle. Phillips knew? All this time? Why do you think Kane had him killed? Jamie holstered his gun as fellow rangers moved to secure the prisoners. Phillips was connecting the past to the present, realizing Kane's current operation mirrored what he'd done 20 years ago. Sarah approached her adopted father, understanding blooming. "That's why my real pa sent me that letter he was reading when it happened. He was trying to warn me about Kane, about the connection to Emma Morgan's murder." Wade struggled to his feet, mud caking his clothes. "All of it. Everything I believed. It was all Kane's manipulation. Not everything." Lawrence finally lowered his shotgun as rangers moved to restrain Kane. "Your father made his own choices, same as we all do. But Kane made sure you never knew the whole truth about those choices." Jake Chen spoke up from his position by the bunkhouse. "Same way he used my guilt about Emma to keep me in line all these years. Always hinting he'd reveal my past if I didn't help him track Morgan's movements." Captain Reynolds gestured to his men. "Take Kane and his deputies into custody. Wade too, though I suspect the judge will take his circumstances into account." As the rangers began securing prisoners, Lawrence turned to Jamie. "How long have you known about the sanctioned mission, about Phillips' investigation?" "Suspected from the start," Jamie admitted. "The governor's office has been building this case for years, trying to understand how deep Kane's corruption went. When they realized it connected all the way back to Emma's murder, they sent me to find you." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "So courting me, teaching me to shoot, that was all just part of your mission?" The mission was to get close to Circle Cross. Jamie's face softened as he looked at her. Falling in love with the old man's daughter. That was my own choice. When I'd make again, Matthew Ross, who had remained unusually quiet, finally spoke. Son, you could have told me about the investigation, about Kane. Couldn't risk it, Pa. Jamie's voice carried genuine regret. Kane had too many eyes, too many ears, had to maintain the fiction of a father and son at odds, just like he'd done with Wade and his father. Lawrence watched as the Rangers led Kane toward their waiting horses. The corrupt marshal's face was a mask of fury and disbelief, decades of careful manipulation undone in a single morning. "Captain," Lawrence called out, "what happens now?" Reynolds paused, studying the man who'd lived so many lives. Fearsome, lawman, grieving widower, vengeful hunter, and finally a rancher who'd built a haven for lost souls. "That depends," the captain replied carefully. Territory still needs men who understand the difference between law and justice, men who can operate in the shadows when necessary. He glanced meaningfully at Circle Cross Ranch. Places like this, they serve a purpose beyond what's written in any law book. Understanding bloomed in Lawrence's mind. You're not just here to arrest Kane. Phillips had a name for operations like this, Reynolds confirmed. Called them waypoints, places where good people who've lost their way can find their path again. Seems to me Circle Cross has been serving that purpose for years, whether you knew it or not. Sarah took her adopted father's hand. "Pa, what's he saying?" Lawrence looked around at the home he'd built, at the ranch hands who'd become family. Jake Chen, the man who'd killed his wife but spent 20 years earning redemption. At Wade, another lost soul who might yet find his way back to the light. "He's offering us a choice," Lawrence explained softly. Same kind of choice Emma believed. She died trying to protect. The sun had passed its zenith, beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. Circle Cross Ranch stood revealed in its harsh light, not just a fortress or a haven, but a crossroads where justice and mercy met, where the law's long arm could bend without breaking, and where lost souls could find their way home. Emma would have understood. More than that, she would have approved. Just as the Rangers began leading Kane toward their horses, a sharp whistle cut through the afternoon air. Before anyone could react, gunfire erupted from the tree line surrounding Circle Cross. 2 Rangers fell immediately while others scrambled for cover. "Ambush!" Captain Reynolds shouted, diving behind a water trough. "Kane's back up!" Lawrence grabbed Sarah and pulled her behind the porch's thick support beam as bullets splintered wood around them. Through the chaos, he caught sight of Kane rolling away from his distracted captors, despite his wounded hands. "You really think I didn't plan for this?" Kane's voice carried over the gunfire, thick with triumph. 20 years of building power, and you thought I'd let it end here?" More riders emerged from the trees, at least 15 men, all wearing badges of different jurisdictions. Kane's corrupt network coming to their leader's aid. "Those are real lawmen," Jamie called out from behind an overturned wagon. "Or they were before Kane bought them. Sheriffs and deputies from 3 territories. Lawrence's mind raced. Circle Cross's defenses were designed for smaller groups, not an army of experienced lawmen. Even with the Rangers' help, they were badly outnumbered. "Sarah," he spoke quickly, "remember the tunnel from the root cellar to Miller's Creek?" "I'm not running, Pa." Her rifle cracked, forcing one of Kane's men to duck behind a tree. "Not this time. Wasn't asking you to." Lawrence managed a grim smile. "Need you to lead Captain Reynolds and his men through it. Flank these bastards from behind." Jake Chen's voice carried from the bunkhouse. "Got a better idea. Dynamite cache in the north barn. Set it right could cut off their escape route." Kane's laugh rang out again as he reached the safety of his men. "See, this is what I created. A whole generation of lawmen who think like outlaws, who understands that justice is just another word for power." More bullets chewed into Circle Crosses. Buildings. Lawrence saw Billy take a hit in the shoulder, while two more Rangers fell to the precision shooting of Kane's corrupt officers. "Morgan!" Kane called out. "One last offer. Surrender now. Let me have the evidence, and I'll let these fine folks live. Fight, and I'll burn this place to the ground, just like I should have done 20 years ago." Wade's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. "You won't burn anything else." Lawrence risked a glance around the beam and saw Wade standing in the open, his father's old revolver pointed at Kane. The young man had retrieved the gun from where it had fallen in the mud earlier. "Boy, what are you doing?" Kane's voice carried equal parts amusement and annoyance. "After everything I taught you about survival." "You taught me hate," Wade replied, his voice steady despite the bullets flying around him. "Taught me to blame Morgan for my father's death, to become the kind of man who'd kill without questioning why." Kane's corrupt officers had a clear shot at Wade, but they held their fire, fascinated by the confrontation. "I made you strong," Kane shouted. "Gave you purpose." "Give me lies," Wade corrected. "Emma tried to save me from becoming this. Time I returned the favor to someone else." He turned slightly, addressing the corrupt lawmen surrounding them. "How many of you did he make strong? How many of you lost something or someone before Kane offered you his kind of purpose?" Lawrence saw uncertainty flicker across several faces in Kane's group. The corrupt marshal must have seen it too, because his voice took on a harder edge. "Shoot him! Shoot all of them!" But Wade wasn't finished. Emma's letter wasn't just evidence against Kane. It was proof that people can choose differently, that revenge and power aren't the only answers. "Beautiful speech," Kane snarled, drawing a hidden gun with his least damaged hand. "Let's see if it stops a bullet." 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Wade's bullet caught Kane in the chest. Kane's shot went wide as he fell, and a third shot from an unexpected source struck Kane's hidden derringer from his other hand. Sarah stood on the porch, her rifle smoking. "That's for my real pa," she said quietly, "and for Emma." The yard fell silent except for Kane's ragged breathing. His corrupt officers looked at each other, uncertainty, their perfect plan unraveling as their leader bled into the mud. "Choice is a funny thing," Lawrence called out, addressing Kane's men. "Something Emma understood better than any of us. Each of you chose to follow Kane's path. Each of you can choose differently now." Captain Reynolds added his voice. "Any man who lowers his weapon in the next 10 seconds gets a chance to testify against Kane. A chance to make things right." "Don't listen." Kane gasped, but his power over them was broken. One by one, badges began falling into the mud as corrupt lawmen laid down their arms. Some looked relieved, others ashamed, but each made the choice for themselves. Jake Chen emerged from the bunkhouse, his shotgun lowered. 20 years ago, Emma Morgan offered me a choice, showed me that even a killer could find redemption. Took me all this time to understand what she meant. Lawrence stepped out from behind the beam, addressing the men who had just surrendered. Circle Cross was built as a fortress, but it became something else, a place for second chances, for new choices. He looked at Wade, still standing tall, despite everything. For laying down the weight of old lies. Sarah moved to Jamie's side, taking his hand. "Pa, what happens to them now?" Lawrence watched as Rangers began taking the surrendered men into custody. Same thing that happened to Jake, same thing that happened to Wade, same thing that happened to all of us who found our way here. They get a choice. "A choice?" one of Kane's former officers asked. "To face justice for what you've done, Captain," Reynolds explained, "but also to help us root out the corruption Kane planted throughout the territories, to use your knowledge of his network to make things right." Kane, his life bleeding out in the mud, managed one last bitter laugh. "You can't change what they are. What I made them." "No," Lawrence agreed, kneeling beside his old friend. "But they can change what they choose to become." Emma understood that. tried to teach it to all of us. Jake approached, carrying bandages. Despite everything Kane had done, they wouldn't let him die in the mud. Fortress becomes a haven, Jake said quietly. Haven becomes a place of choosing, all because one woman believed in second chances. The sun had begun its descent toward evening, casting long shadows across Circle Cross's bullet-scarred buildings. Lawrence looked at the faces surrounding him, Sarah and Jamie, their love born from investigation and deception, but grown into something true. Wade, finally free of his father's twisted legacy. The Rangers and former corrupt lawmen, each facing choices that would reshape their lives. And somewhere, he thought he could feel Emma watching, approving how her death had led not to endless vengeance, but to this moment of transformation. This chance for justice tempered by mercy, for law shaped by understanding. Kane's network of corruption was broken, but the real work was just beginning. Circle Cross would need to become more than a fortress or a haven now. It would need to be a beacon, showing others the path Emma had tried to illuminate with her final acts of love and forgiveness. Lawrence touched the pocket holding her letter. Sometimes the greatest power wasn't in the choices we made, but in the choices we offered others. Evening shadows crept across Circle Cross as rangers tended to the wounded and secured prisoners. Kane lay semi-conscious in the back of a wagon, his injuries treated, but his future sealed. The corrupt marshal's network was shattered, but questions still hung in the air like gunsmoke. Lawrence stood on his bullet-scarred porch, watching Sarah help Jamie bind a ranger's wounded arm. The girl had her mother's gentle touch, even after everything she'd seen, everything she'd learned about her adopted father's past. "Sir," Billy approached, his own bandaged shoulder carried stiffly. "Found something else when I was getting Emma's box. Hidden compartment in the barn wall." He held out a stack of yellowed papers. Looks like Kane wasn't the only one keeping records. Lawrence recognized the handwriting immediately. Phillips, Sarah's real father. The dead marshal's investigation had gone deeper than anyone suspected. "Captain Reynolds," Lawrence called out, "think you'll want to see this." The ranger captain joined them on the porch, taking the papers with a raised eyebrow. "More evidence?" "More than that," Lawrence replied. Phillips wasn't just investigating Kane's current operation. He was tracking something bigger, something that started before Emma's murder. Reynolds began reading, his expression growing grave. "My God, this goes back 30 years. Kane wasn't just corrupting lawmen, he was building dynasties, getting his men appointed as judges, territorial governors, building a shadow empire," Jake added, joining them. "Using the law to protect criminals who paid for the privilege. Using honest lawmen like Lawrence to eliminate those who wouldn't pay." Sarah's voice carried from the yard. "That's why you really sent me that letter, isn't it, Pa? Not just to warn me about Kane, but to make sure someone survived who knew the whole truth." Lawrence studied Phillips's papers, pieces falling into place. "Your father was building a case that would shake 3 territories. Kane didn't just kill him to protect himself. He was protecting dozens of powerful men." "Men who are still out there," Reynolds said grimly. "Still wearing badges, sitting on benches, governing territories." Wade, who had been sitting quietly nearby, spoke up. "That's why Kane was so interested in Circle Cross, not just because of the gold hidden in Miller's Creek. He knew Phillips had hidden evidence here." "But how?" Jamie asked. "How did Phillips know to hide it here specifically?" Lawrence smiled slightly. "Because he knew who I really was. Knew Emma and I had built Circle Cross as more than just a ranch." He turned to Sarah. "Your father and I worked together years ago. Before Kane corrupted everything, we always had a backup plan, a place where evidence could be safely hidden." "A waypoint," Reynolds nodded in understanding. "Not just for Lost." souls, but for lost truths. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. More rangers were arriving, led by a weather-beaten man Lawrence hadn't seen in 15 years. "Judge Harrison," Lawrence breathed. "Or should I say Marshal Harrison?" The older man dismounted stiffly. "Been a long time, Lawrence. Been keeping tabs on this place since Emma died, waiting for the right moment to move against Kane's organization." Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew all this time?" Harrison nodded. "Had to let Kane think he'd won. Had to let him believe his network was secure, while all along men like your father were gathering evidence, building cases, preparing for this day." Lawrence felt the weight of years lifting. Emma's letter. The copies she sent to trusted friends. "Went to men like me," Harrison confirmed. "Men Kane thought he'd bought, but who were actually working to bring him down. Emma's death wasn't in vain, Lawrence. It was the catalyst that started all of this." Kane's bitter laugh drifted from the wagon. "You really think it ends with me? The system, the whole damn system, is corrupt," Harrison agreed. "But not beyond saving. That's what Emma believed. What Phillips died believing. What Circle Cross represents." Lawrence looked around at his home, at the bullet holes and bloodstains, at the faces of friends and enemies alike who had found truth here today. "So what happens now?" Reynolds and Harrison exchanged glances. "That depends on you," Harrison said. "Circle Cross is more than just a waypoint now. It's proof that justice and mercy can coexist, that men can change if given the chance." "You're offering me my badge back," Lawrence realized. "Better than that," Reynolds added. "We're offering you a chance to make Circle Cross official, a place where corrupted lawmen can come clean, where evidence can be protected, where the law can bend without breaking." Sarah moved to her adopted father's side. "Just like Emma wanted, a place of second chances." "Won't be easy," Harrison warned. "Kane's network runs deep. Some of the men he corrupted won't want redemption, won't want the truth exposed." Wade stood, brushing mud from his clothes. "Then they'll have to go through us, through all of us who found something better than revenge here." Jamie nodded. "The governor's office will support this. We've been looking for a way to clean up the territories without destroying the system entirely." Lawrence touched Emma's letter in his pocket. "Jake, you've earned your redemption. You don't have to stay." The old cook smiled slightly. "Man finds his path, he stays on it. Besides, someone needs to feed all these reformed lawmen you'll be taking in." Billy and the other ranch hands stepped forward, making their positions clear. They'd found more than just work at Circle Cross. They'd found purpose. "What about you?" Lawrence asked Sarah softly. "This life. It's not what you signed up for when you took shelter in my barn." Sarah looked at Jamie, then back at her adopted father. "Family isn't what you sign up for, Pa. It's what you choose. And I choose this." The sun had almost set, painting Circle Cross in shades of gold and shadow. Lawrence thought about Emma's final words, about choices and redemption, about how sometimes the greatest justice came not from punishment, but from transformation. "Harrison," he said finally, "those men of Kane's who surrendered, the ones who chose differently when Wade spoke up, what happens to them? Depends on what they know, what they're willing to share, how much they want to make amends." Lawrence nodded slowly. "Bring them here. Let them earn their redemption the same way Jake did. The same way we all have. It won't be free," Reynolds cautioned. "Justice has a price." "But mercy," Lawrence replied, "mercy is given freely. Emma taught me that. Took 20 years to understand it, but I finally did." Kane's network of corruption had taken decades to build, spreading like poison through the territories. It would take time to undo the damage, to rebuild trust in the law, but Circle Cross would stand as a testament to Emma's belief in second chances, in the power of choice to reshape a soul. The first stars appeared above the mountains as Lawrence, Morgan, no longer hiding behind Thomas Green's name, looked at the family he'd built, at the legacy he'd helped create. In the future, Emma had died believing in. Sometimes the past didn't just catch up, it showed you the way forward. Night settled over Circle Cross like a dark velvet blanket, but sleep was far from anyone's mind. Judge Harrison's revelation about the scope of Kane's corruption had changed everything. What had seemed like an end was really just a beginning. Lawrence stood in his study, surrounded by maps of the 3 territories. Red marks indicated known corrupt officials, judges, marshals, even a territorial governor. Black marks showed suspected collaborators. The web of corruption stretched further than anyone had imagined. They won't go quietly, Harrison warned, studying the maps by lamplight. These men have too much power, too much to lose. Sarah entered carrying coffee, Jamie close behind her. Already getting reports of movement, the young agent said. Kane's allies are mobilizing, calling in favors, gathering men. How many? Lawrence asked, though he already suspected the answer. At least 50 riders spotted heading this way from Helena, Jamie replied grimly. More coming from the south, all wearing badges of one kind or another. Wade spoke up from his position by the window. They'll try to take the Circle Cross. Destroy the evidence, silence the witnesses, make it look like a battle between lawmen and outlaws. Lawrence nodded slowly. The corrupt officials couldn't afford to let Kane's network be exposed. They'd send everything they had, try to bury the truth under an avalanche of false justice. Pah! Sarah's voice carried steel beneath its concern. We can't hold against those numbers, not even with the Rangers' help. Maybe we don't have to, Jake offered, entering with more maps. Remember why you built Circle Cross here, Lawrence? Remember all those defensive positions we mapped out? Lawrence smiled slightly. The old cook's tactical mind had always been sharp. The valleys are natural. Fortress, high ground on 3 sides, river protecting the 4th. And we've had years to prepare. Captain Reynolds joined them, his face grave. My men are good, but we're outnumbered 4 to 1, and these aren't just outlaws. They're experienced lawmen gone bad. They know every trick in the book. Then we'll have to write a new book, Lawrence replied. He turned to Billy, who stood guard at the door. Get the men together. Time to show them what Circle Cross really is. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Lawrence led them through. The ranch's hidden defenses, concealed rifle positions, underground passages, storage caches filled with ammunition and supplies. Everything he'd built over 15 years, preparing for a day he'd hoped would never come. These tunnels connect all the main buildings, he explained, leading them through a concealed doorway in the barn. Let us move without being seen, outflank. Any attack. Wade studied the setup with professional appreciation. You built a fortress disguised as a ranch. No wonder Kane was so interested in this place. Not just a fortress, Sarah corrected, understanding blooming. A trap. You knew someday they'd come in force. You were ready for it, Lawrence nodded. Your father, Phillips, he helped design some of this. Said if Kane's network ever discovered what we were building, they'd commit everything to destroying. It'd give us one chance to catch them all. Harrison examined a hidden artillery position overlooking the valley approach. You've got enough firepower here to hold off an army. Going to need it, Jamie reported, returning from a scouting run. Just got word from our observers. They're gathering at Miller's Creek, at least 70 men now, maybe more coming. Reynolds whistled softly. 70 corrupt lawmen. If we can capture even half of them, we can unravel Kane's whole organization, Harrison finished. But they'll have to commit themselves. Enter the valley where we can trap them. Lawrence spread out a detailed map of the area. 6 primary defensive positions, each covering the others. Tunnels letting us shift forces where needed. And something extra we've been saving for a special occasion. He led them to a concealed chamber beneath the main house. Inside, rows of strange devices lined the walls. Modified shotgun shells, homemade explosives, and other innovations Jake had developed over the years. Been experimenting, the old cook explained. Ways to fight superior numbers. Things they won't expect from simple ranchers. Sarah picked up one of the modified shells. This is why you had me learning chemistry? Why did you insist I understand explosives and fuses? Lawrence smiled proudly. Knew someday you'd need more than just straight shooting to survive. Your real father believed the same. It's why he sent you those books on engineering before Kane killed him. The scope of Lawrence's preparations stunned even Harrison. You didn't just build a defensive position. You created a whole strategy, a way to fight corruption on its own terms. Had to, Lawrence replied simply. Emma's letter showed us what we were really fighting. Not just men, but a system, a way of thinking that puts power above justice. They spent the next hours positioning men, distributing weapons, setting up fields of fire. The ranch hands moved with practiced efficiency. They drilled these movements for years, never knowing when they'd be needed. Wade proved invaluable. His intimate knowledge of how Kane's men thought, helping them anticipate attack routes. They'll come in waves, he explained. Try to overwhelm us with numbers. But they'll be overconfident, expecting to find just a handful of rangers and ranchers. Let them come, Billy said fiercely, his wounded shoulder bandaged but his spirit unbroken. Circle Cross has been a home to us. Time we returned the favor. As midnight approached, Lawrence gathered everyone in the main. House, rangers, ranch hands, reformed outlaws, all looking to him for leadership, for hope. Tomorrow, he began, his voice carrying to every corner, they'll come to bury the truth, to silence witnesses, destroy evidence, maintain their corrupt power. They think they're facing a few stubborn holdouts. They don't understand what Circle Cross really is. Sarah stepped to his side, rifle ready. A place of second chances, a fortress of justice, Jamie added. A home worth fighting for, Jake said quietly. Lawrence nodded, feeling Emma's presence almost tangibly in the room. 20 years ago, Kane destroyed my home, killed my wife, and corrupted everything we believed in. He thought he'd broken me, forced me into hiding. What he really did was give me time to build this place, time to gather good people, time to prepare for exactly this moment. Wade checked his father's revolver, now a symbol of redemption rather than vengeance. They'll hit us at dawn. It's how Kane trained them, attack with the sun in the defender's eyes. Let them come, Lawrence replied. Circle Cross has waited 20 years for this sunrise, time to show them what justice really looks like. As if in response to his words, a distant rider appeared on the valley rim, silhouetted against the stars. A scout, checking their defenses. Tomorrow there will be a storm. Lawrence touched Emma's letter in his pocket, then looked at the family he'd built, the home he'd created, the legacy he'd protect. Sometimes the moment you'd been preparing for all your life arrived dressed as your worst nightmare. But if Emma had taught him anything, it was that nightmares could become opportunities for redemption. Dawn painted the eastern sky blood red as the first riders appeared on the valley rim. They came in formation, badges glinting in the early light. Corrupt lawmen from 3 territories gathered to bury the truth beneath Circle Cross's ruins. Lawrence watched them from the barn cupola, counting numbers through his spyglass. 83 riders, he reported through the acoustic tube Jake had installed years ago, split into 3 groups, just like Wade predicted. In the command center beneath the main house, Sarah marked their positions on the map. Jamie studied the formations with a tactical eye. Main force coming straight up the valley. 2 smaller, groups moving to high ground on either side. Trying to catch us in a crossfire, Wade added. Standard Kane tactic. Lawrence allowed himself a small smile. Everything was proceeding exactly as they'd planned, as they'd prepared for during 15 years of waiting. The corrupt lawmen's leader, a man Lawrence recognized as Judge Matthews, from Helena rode forward with a white flag. His voice boomed across the morning stillness. By authority of the territorial court, surrender Circle Cross and all evidence within. Resist, and we'll consider you outlaws to be dealt with accordingly. Lawrence's response was to raise the American flag over the main house, a signal to their hidden positions. Across the valley, concealed defenders readied weapons and waited. The attack came with the rising sun, just as Wade had predicted. The main force charged straight up the valley, while flanking groups opened fire from the ridges. They expected to catch Circle Cross's defenders in a killing zone. Instead, they rode into carefully prepared hell. Jake's modified shotgun shells turned the morning air into streaking fire. Defenders emerged from hidden positions, their rifles speaking with precise authority. The first wave of attackers fell back in confusion, leaving horses and riders scattered. Across the valley floor, they're pulling back, Sarah reported through the tube network. Regrouping for another push. Lawrence nodded grimly. Just like we wanted. Billy, light the welcome fires. Prepared oil trenches blazed to life, cutting off the corrupt lawman's retreat. More defenders appeared on the ridges, Reynolds Rangers, and reformed outlaws working together, forcing the flanking groups to seek cover. Judge Matthews' voice carried notes of desperation now. "Morgan, you're only delaying the inevitable. We'll burn Circle Cross to the ground, just like Kane should have done 20 years ago." "Different time, different man," Lawrence murmured, then louder. "Jake, show them what else we've been preparing." The Old Cook's most ambitious creation launched from concealed positions, modified fireworks that filled the air with deafening explosions and blinding flashes. Horses panicked, formations broke, and carefully planned attacks dissolved into chaos. "Pa!" Sarah's voice held urgency. "They're trying to ford the river, coming in behind the north barn." Lawrence was already moving through the tunnel network, emerging behind the attackers just as they gained the bank. His shotgun roared twice, sending them scrambling back into the water. "Boss!" Billy's voice carried through the tubes. "Wade says they're gathering for a major push, at least 40 riders." Through his spyglass, Lawrence saw Judge Matthews organizing his remaining men for one decisive charge. They'd lost almost 20 riders already, but still held a significant numerical advantage. "Harrison," Lawrence called through the tube network, "time for the second act." The judge-turned-marshal had been waiting for this moment. He emerged from cover on the valley rim, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of service. "Matthew Collins, Robert Shaw, William Tanner, remember your oaths, men. Remember when you wore those badges with honor." The effect on the corrupt lawmen was electric. Some reined their horses in, recognizing their former mentor. Others looked uncertain at their companions, years of guilt finally surfacing. "They lied to you," Harrison continued. "Told you this was about outlaws, threatening the law. Look around. Look at who you're really fighting. Good men defending truth against corruption." Judge Matthews tried to rally his forces. "Kill them all. We can't let them expose." A shot rang out from the corrupt lawman's own ranks, taking Matthews off. More guns turned, brother against brother, as the weight of deception finally broke. 20 years, Lawrence added his voice. 20 years of Kane's lies, of bought justice and murdered innocents. Emma Morgan died trying to expose this. Corruption. Marshal Phillips died protecting his daughter from it. How many more have to die to protect their profits? The battle dissolved into chaos of a different sort. Corrupt lawmen turned on each other, some trying to flee, others attempting to surrender. The prepared killing ground became a scene of redemption and revelation. Sarah's voice carried triumph. "Pa, they're breaking, running for the valley entrance." But Lawrence had been watching Judge Matthews through his spyglass. The corrupt judge wasn't fleeing. He was heading for the North Barn with a small group of dedicated followers. The evidence, Lawrence realized. They're going for Phillips' papers. Jamie, take the east tunnel. Sarah, cover the barn roof. Wait, with me? They converged on the barn, just as Matthews and his men broke in. The corrupt judge had found the hidden room and was already reaching for the damning documents. Far enough, Lawrence's voice cut through the chaos. Time to face the truth instead of burning it. Matthews spun, gun raised, but Wade was faster. The young man who'd once served Kane now served justice, his father's revolver speaking one final time. As Matthews fell, his remaining men surrendered. Outside, the sound of gunfire died away, replaced by the calls of men yielding their weapons, choosing truth over power. Lawrence emerged from the barn to find the valley transformed. Corrupt lawmen lay down their badges, accepting arrest from Reynolds Rangers. Others stood in shocked silence, finally facing the weight of their choices. Sarah ran to embrace her adopted father, while Jamie coordinated with Harrison to secure prisoners. Wade stood quietly by his father's old enemy, now his mentor in redemption. Circle Cross stands, Jake observed, joining them. Just like Emma would have wanted. Lawrence touched the letter in his pocket, feeling the weight of 20 years lifting. More than standing, it's become what she believed in. A place where justice and mercy meet, where good men can find their way back to the light. Harrison approached, his face grave but satisfied. 38 surrendered, 15 dead, the rest scattered, but we've got their names. Kane's network is broken. And the evidence? Jamie asked. Safe, Lawrence assured him. Philip's papers, Emma's letter, everything they tried to bury. Truth has a way of surviving, if you give it shelter. Sarah studied the valley, where rangers and reformed outlaws worked together to tend wounded and secure prisoners. What happens to them now? The ones who surrendered. Lawrence smiled slightly. Same thing that happened to Wade. Same thing that happened to all of us. They get a choice. The sun had fully risen, burning away the morning mist. Circle Cross Ranch stood scarred but undefeated, its buildings bearing witness to the price of truth, to the cost of justice, to the power of choice. Wade picked up a discarded badge, studying its tarnished surface. Kane believed power was the only law, that everyone could be corrupted, given enough pressure. He was wrong, Lawrence replied, simply. Emma proved that. Phillips proved it. Every man who chose differently today proved it. Harrison nodded slowly. Circle Cross isn't just a waypoint anymore. It's a symbol, a reminder that the law is meant to serve justice, not power. As if in answer, a morning breeze caught the American flag still flying over the main house. It snapped proudly in the wind. No longer just a signal for battle, but a promise of what could be rebuilt from the ashes of corruption. Lawrence Morgan, no longer hiding behind any name or facade, looked at the family he'd built, at the legacy he'd protected. In the future, Emma had died believing in. Sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in defeating your enemies, but in showing them a better path. 1 month after the battle that became known as the Circle Cross Reckoning, Lawrence Morgan stood beside 2 freshly painted headstones in the small cemetery overlooking the valley. One bore Emma's name, finally moved from its secret location to rest in the light of day. The other honored Marshal Phillips, Sarah's father, his sacrifice no longer hidden by Kane's lies. "Brought you both something," Lawrence said softly, placing Emma's letter between the graves, evidence that good survives, that truth finds its way home. Sarah's footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind him. "Town meeting's about to start, Pa. Judge Harrison says they can't begin without you," Lawrence nodded, taking a final moment with his dead body. Circle Cross had changed in the weeks following the battle. New buildings had risen alongside the old, transforming the ranch into something unique in the territories, a training ground for lawmen, a place where justice could be restored, one soul at a time. The main house's gathering room was packed when they arrived. Harrison stood at the front, while Jamie organized papers on a table nearby. Wade sat among the former corrupt lawmen who'd chosen redemption, his father's revolver now worn with understanding rather than anger. "Quite a gathering," Jake observed from his position by the door. The old cook had refused any official role in the new Circle Cross, content to continue feeding its expanding family. Harrison called the meeting to order. First official session of the Circle Cross Commission. Lawrence, would you share our purpose with these men? Lawrence studied the faces before him, rangers and reformed outlaws, corrupt lawmen seeking redemption, young deputies hoping to learn true justice, all looking to him for guidance. 20 years ago, he began, a good woman died trying to expose corruption in our territories. She believed that power without justice was just another form of tyranny. Those badges and offices meant nothing, without honor behind them. He moved to the map-covered wall, where red marks still showed Kane's former network. Emma Morgan and Marshall Phillips gave their lives protecting the truth. The Circle Cross was built to honor that sacrifice, to become more than just a fortress or a haven, to be a place where justice could be rebuilt. Jamie stepped forward with a stack of papers. Thanks to the evidence gathered by Marshall Phillips and the testimony of those who've chosen to make things right, we've identified over 200 corrupt officials across 3 territories. Judge Harrison has authorized us to begin cleaning the house. But that's just the beginning, Lawrence continued. Circle Cross isn't about vengeance or punishment. It's about restoration, about remembering what that badge really means. Sarah distributed newspapers to the assembled men, training schedules, legal procedures, everything you'll need to help rebuild trust in the law, to show others there's a way back from corruption. Wade stood, addressing his former colleagues. Kane taught us that power was everything, that justice could be bought and sold. He was wrong. I learned that here, watching how Lawrence Morgan built something stronger than fear or greed. A second chance, one of the reformed lawmen said quietly, like Emma Morgan believed in. Lawrence nodded. This commission has full authority from the territorial government. We'll be training new lawmen, investigating corruption, and helping those who want to make amends find their way back to honor. Harrison took over, outlining specific procedures and assignments, but Lawrence's attention was drawn to the window, where morning sun painted Circle Cross in shades of promise. The bullet holes had been patched, the scars of battle mostly healed, but the changes went deeper than mere repairs. Sarah joined him at the window. Think Emma would be proud of what her sacrifice was built? She believed in second chances, Lawrence replied softly. In mercy tempering justice, in the power of choice to reshape a soul. Everything Circle Cross has grown from those beliefs. Jamie approached with news from the capital. Governors approved our full budget. We'll be able to expand the training facilities, build proper dormitories for the recruits. And Kane? Lawrence asked, though he already knew the answer. Trials, set for next month in Helena. Between Philip's evidence and the testimony of his former men, he'll never see freedom again. Lawrence watched the activity in the yard below. Rangers drilling with reformed outlaws, Jake teaching young deputies about tracking, Billy leading a group in maintaining the defensive positions that had proved so crucial. Pa, Sarah's voice, carried a hint of mischief. Jamie and I have been thinking about Emma's belief in second chances, about family being something you choose. Lawrence raised an eyebrow at the young couple. That an official request for a father's blessing? Jamie straightened formally. Yes, sir. Figure if Circle Cross is about building something new from the ashes of the old, Sarah and I could do the same. Emma would approve, Lawrence smiled. She always said love was the strongest foundation for any future worth building. The meeting continued behind them, Harrison's voice laying out plans for investigating remaining corruption. But here by the window, Lawrence felt the weight of the past finally lifting. Emma's letter had led not to endless vengeance, but to something she would have valued far more: hope for the future. Wade joined them, his face thoughtful. "Been thinking about what you said, about Circle Cross training new lawmen. Thought maybe I could help. Show them how to spot the kind of corruption Kane used to trap me." "Be honored to have you," Lawrence replied. "Though teaching's harder than learning." "Everything worth doing is," Sarah added, her hand finding Jamie's. Lawrence touched the pocket where Emma's letter had rested for so many years. He'd finally laid it to rest between the graves, its purpose fulfilled. Its truth had not only exposed corruption, but had built something new, a legacy of justice tempered by mercy, of law guided by understanding. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating Circle Cross Ranch in all its transformed glory, no longer just a fortress hiding secrets, but a beacon showing the way forward, a place where past and future met, where redemption was not just possible, but expected. Emma had died, believing in second chances. Marshal Phillips had died protecting the truth. Their sacrifices had led to this moment, this gathering of souls, seeking to rebuild what corruption had nearly destroyed. Lawrence Morgan, the legendary left hand whose vengeance had transformed into something far more powerful, looked at the family he'd built, at the legacy he'd protected, in the future he'd helped create. Sometimes the greatest justice wasn't in punishing evil, but in helping good find its way home. 5 years after the Circle Cross reckoning, a lone rider approached the expanded ranch beneath a golden autumn sunset. The changes were obvious. New buildings dotted the valley, training grounds spread across the former pastures, and the American flag still flew proud above it all. But the heart of Circle Cross remained unchanged, a testament to the power of truth and redemption. Lawrence Morgan sat on his familiar porch, watching the rider approach. Age had finally started to catch up with him, silver threading his hair, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. Beside him, Jake Chen rocked quietly, both men sharing the peaceful evening moment. "That'll be the new territorial marshal," Jake observed. "Right on time." Lawrence smiled slightly. Sarah always was punctual. The rider drew closer, revealing Sarah Morgan Ross in her official marshal's uniform, the silver star catching the last rays of sunlight. She'd earned that badge the hard way, working alongside Jamie to rebuild trust in the law across 3 territories. "Evening, Pa," she called out, dismounting smoothly. "Got news from Helena you'll want to hear." Lawrence gestured to the empty rocking chair. "Join us. Jake just made coffee." As Sarah settled in, Lawrence studied his adopted daughter with pride. She'd grown into everything both her fathers, Phillips and himself, could have hoped for. A defender of justice who understood the importance of mercy. "Kane's dead," she said without preamble. "Found him in his cell this morning, left a confession." Lawrence absorbed this news quietly. The corrupt marshal had spent 5 years in prison, watching his network of corruption dismantled piece by piece. Natural causes, according to the doctor. Sarah accepted a cup of coffee from Jake. But that's not the important part. His confession, he finally admitted everything. About Emma, about Phillips, about all of it. Named every corrupt official he'd ever worked with. "Bit late for that," Jake commented. "Most of them have already been brought to justice." Maybe he was trying to find his own kind of redemption, Lawrence mused. Emma would have appreciated that. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "There's more. Jamie's bringing it up from town later, but Kane left something for you. A letter." Lawrence's hands stilled on his coffee cup. "After all this time," said he wrote it years ago after the trial. "Been holding on to it until he found the courage to face the truth himself." The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Jamie Ross led a small group of riders, new recruits for Circle Cross's training program by the look of them. Wade rode among them, now a full-time instructor in spotting and preventing corruption. "Brought the fresh batch," Jamie called out, helping a young deputy dismount, though Wade's already filled their heads with tales about the reckoning. "Good," Lawrence replied. "They need to understand what we're building here, what we're trying to prevent from happening again." The new recruits gathered respectfully, knowing they stood in the presence of living legend. Lawrence Morgan's story had spread far beyond Montana territory, becoming a symbol of justice restored and honor redeemed. "Tell them, Pa," Sarah encouraged. "Tell them about Emma, about why Circle Cross exists." Lawrence studied the young faces before him, seeing the same hope he'd once carried as a young lawman. Before Kane's corruption, before Emma's death, before everything changed. 25 years ago, he began, a good woman died trying to protect the truth. She believed that every soul deserved a chance at redemption, that justice without mercy was just another kind of tyranny. The recruits listened intently as Lawrence recounted the story, not just of Emma's death and Kane's corruption, but of Circle Cross's transformation, of how a fortress built for vengeance had become a beacon of hope. "Look around you," he gestured to the expanded ranch. Every building, every training ground, every piece of Circle Cross was built on a foundation of second chances, of good people choosing differently when given the opportunity. Wade stepped forward, adding his own perspective. "I came here hunting, for revenge, following Kane's lies. Found something better, a chance to make right what my father and men like him had made wrong." Jamie distributed training manuals to the recruits. "You're not just here to learn law enforcement. You're here to understand the difference between law and justice, between power and authority." "The badge you'll wear," Sarah added, touching her own star, "it's not just a symbol of power, it's a promise to protect the truth, to offer mercy, when possible, justice when necessary." As the sun dipped below the mountains, Lawrence led the group to the cemetery on the hill. Emma's grave stood alongside Phillips's, their shared sacrifice honored by the legacy they'd inspired. "Circle Cross began with their deaths," Lawrence explained, "but it lives through the choices we make, through every corrupt lawman who finds redemption, every young deputy who learns true justice, every soul that chooses light over darkness." The new recruits stood respectfully as Lawrence placed fresh flowers on both graves. Jake led them in a quiet prayer, while Sarah and Jamie shared knowing looks. They'd all been touched by Circle Cross's power to transform lives. "Kane's letter," Sarah said softly as the others headed back down the hill. "Want me to have Jamie bring it up?" Lawrence touched Emma's headstone one last time. "No need. Whatever confession he wrote, whatever peace he found, it's enough to know he faced the truth in the end." Emma would have wanted that. The evening star appeared above the mountains as Lawrence Morgan stood among the graves of those who'd shaped his path. Circle Cross had begun in vengeance, but had grown into something far more powerful, a testament to Emma's belief that every soul could choose differently when offered the chance. 25 years had passed since Emma's death. 20 years since he'd built Circle Cross as a fortress. 5 years since the reckoning had transformed it into something more. And still, every sunset reminded him of that fundamental truth she died protecting. That justice without mercy was empty, but mercy guided by justice could reshape the world. Sarah touched her father's arm gently. "Coming to dinner, Pa. Jake's made your favorite." Lawrence smiled, hearing in her voice echoes of another woman who'd believed in second chances. "Right behind you, girl. Just saying goodnight to old friends." As darkness settled over Circle Cross, lights began appearing in windows across the expanded ranch. In the dormitories where future lawmen studied true justice, in the training halls where reformed outlaws taught from hard experience, in the main house where a family built from choice rather than blood gathered to share their day. Lawrence Morgan, no longer the legendary left hand or the humble rancher Thomas Green, but something greater than either, looked out over the legacy he'd helped build. Emma's sacrifice had led not to endless vengeance, but to endless possibility. The chance for justice and mercy to work hand in hand, reshaping the territories one redeemed soul at a time. Sometimes the greatest legacy wasn't what you built, but what you inspired others to become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.